Welcome to the Deep Dive.
It's great to be diving in again.
Today, we're looking at a book that's often a first stop for anyone curious about sociology. Invitation to Sociology by John Witt.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. It's not just, a dry textbook. It's part of this quite respected series, and you find it used all over the place in intro courses, especially in the U.S. It's actually been a bestseller, which is pretty unusual for this kind of book. Shows it resonates beyond just students.
And the author, John Witt, he seems to have a real focus on making this stuff accessible, right? He teaches introductory sociology.
Exactly. And his approach in the book isn't to just dump everything on you like some huge encyclopedia of sociology or hit you with loads of jargon.
So what does he do instead?
He sort of traces the field's development. He pulls out the core ideas, the big questions, the insights that really fundamentally shape how we think about ourselves and how we interact. It's about getting the essence.
It sounds more like a conversation, maybe, like someone guiding you through it.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. He uses really vivid language, lots of examples. It feels less like you're reading a textbook and more like a knowledgeable friend is explaining why society works the way it does, the hidden stuff.
Okay, so for our deep dive today, what's our mission? What are we trying to unpack from this invitation?
Well, I think we should hit the big points. First, how do sociologists actually study society? What's their approach? Then dig into some of those key ideas, those sort of social laws the early thinkers were looking for.
Like the big names Durkheim, Weber.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then tackle that really complex relationship between us as individuals and the bigger society. How do we shape it? How does it shape us? Let's try applying that sociological lens to things we all kind of know, like marriage and faith, and see if it gives us a fresh perspective, makes us see them a bit differently.
Sounds like a plan. Gaining that sociological vision almost.
Yeah, seeing the invisible structures.
All right, let's unpack this. Where do we even start when trying to study something as massive and messy as society? What's the basic sociological view?
The book starts pretty fundamentally. Society, at its core, is this large collective. It's just all of us, individuals living together. But the key is that we're interacting.
It's not just a pile of people.
No, exactly. We interact in all sorts of ways.
Oh, really?
Through how we divide up work, the division of labor, through communication, obviously,
Right.
Cooperation, even conflict is a form of interaction.
And culture fits in here somehow.
Culture is absolutely central. Think of it
Yeah.
like the operating system we all share, more or less. It's the lens we use to make sense of the world, understand each other's actions, figure out where we fit in. It gives us our values, our norms, what we think is right or wrong.
So sociology zooms in on the connections.
Precisely. It's not just studying individuals alone or society as some abstract blob. It's focused squarely on the relationships between individuals and also the relationship between the individual and the whole society. And, importantly, what happens because of those connections? What are the consequences?
And for this study to be valid, the author says something is absolutely required.
Respecting the facts. You have to try and look at the social world as objectively as possible, even when the facts make you uncomfortable or go against what you believe.
And one of the biggest, maybe most uncomfortable facts for sociologists is the massive significance of social status.
Oh, absolutely. This is fundamental. And when sociologists talk about social status, it's not just about being famous or rich in the everyday sense. It's about your position within the social structure, where you stand relative to everyone else.
Okay, and the book breaks this down into two types.
Yeah, two key aspects to get your head around. The first is what we usually think of as status, hierarchical status.
That sounds like rank.
It is. It's about where you fall in the pecking order, based on things like wealth, property, how much power you wield, how much prestige or respect you command. And the really crucial point the author makes is that so much about our lives, our relationships, our beliefs, the opportunities we get, often flows directly from that hierarchical status.
It really shapes what's possible for you.
Definitely. Think about a company. The general manager's position, their hierarchical status, dictates their tasks, making big decisions, setting strategy. And those decisions directly impact what the employees further down the hierarchy do, their tasks, their autonomy. Your place limits you.
Makes sense. What's the second type of status?
The second is role status. This one is less about rank and more about the different functions people perform, often shaped by the division of labor.
Like teacher and student.
Perfect example. In a school, they have distinct roles. It's not necessarily about one having vastly more wealth or power outside the school, but within that context, their roles define what they do and what they can't do.
Right. A student can't set the school budget.
And a teacher can't do the student's homework. Even though we feel like we have free choice, these role statuses constantly channel our behavior and set expectations in different situations.
So this influence of social status, both rank and role, it's everywhere, even if we don't always see it or like acknowledging it.
It's pervasive, often unseen, often uncomfortable, but unavoidable if you want to understand society accurately. The author points out that the founding figures, like Durkheim and Weber, their work was deeply grounded in analyzing the impact of social status. You can't do sociology without it.
Okay, so acknowledging status is step one, but how did early sociology actually do its research? What were the methods?
Well, you have to remember the context. Sociology was born in France right after the Revolution, a time of huge upheaval, but also buzzing with Enlightenment ideas about reason and progress.
So people are trying to figure out how to rebuild society.
Yet, lots of thinkers were proposing philosophical blueprints. But one guy, Auguste Comte, he was really influenced by the Enlightenment's faith in science. He insisted that philosophy wasn't enough. If you really wanted to understand society, and maybe even fix it, you had to use science.
He wanted to apply scientific methods to people.
Pretty much. He took methods from the natural sciences like careful observation, induction, deduction, analyzing data, and applied them to social life. That's really how sociology got started as its own distinct field, armed with these scientific tools, looking for objective social facts, almost like laws of society.
But society isn't exactly like rocks or chemicals, is it? People are involved.
Exactly the problem they ran into. As the field developed, sociologists realized that human society is incredibly complex. It's made of conscious, thinking, feeling people, not just predictable parts. A purely rigid natural science approach wasn't quite capturing the full picture, especially the relationship between the individual and society.
So they needed something more flexible.
They did. And this led to one of the cornerstone concepts in sociology, the sociological imagination.
Okay, what does that involve? It sounds abstract.
It requires a kind of mental gymnastics, really.
Yeah.
You need to be able to zoom in, focus on individual lives, personal experiences, the details of daily life, because that's where reality happens for people.
But you can't stop there.
No. You also have to be able to zoom out, step back and see how those personal troubles and private lives are connected to larger social forces, historical patterns, the way institutions are set up.
Seeing the connection between the personal and the public.
That's the classic phrase for it, yeah. It means going beyond just applying fixed methods. It's about analyzing problems by looking at the historical context, understanding big organizational shifts, seeing how widespread social patterns shape individual choices and outcomes.
Okay, this is getting interesting. How does this sociological imagination actually work in practice? The book has an example, right?
Yeah, it's a really good one to illustrate the difference. Let's say you have a friend who just loves wearing sky blue clothes. It's her absolute favorite color.
Okay. Seems like a simple personal preference.
If you were using those early, purely scientific methods, you'd study her. You might give her surveys about color preferences, ask about her childhood, maybe track her shopping habits. You'd gather data about the individual and draw conclusions based on that.
Studying based on her experience.
Right. But the sociological imagination pushes you further. You have to step back and ask, what else is going on?
So looking beyond just her personal taste.
Exactly. You might find out that, say, back in 2002, a really famous fashion designer made sky blue a centerpiece of their collection. Maybe around the same time, a big brand launched a popular clothing line featuring a kind of sky blue military look. And then over the next few years, maybe sky blue just kept popping up on runways, became trendy, and suddenly it was everywhere in the shops.
Ah, so the availability and the trendiness influenced her.
That's the conclusion the sociological imagination leads you to. Our feeling that sky blue is her personal choice isn't necessarily wrong, but it wasn't formed in a vacuum. It was heavily shaped by these broader social and cultural trends, designers setting trends, the fashion industry making it available and desirable. Her free choice was influenced by forces she probably wasn't even aware of.
That really clarifies it. It shows how personal things are tied to bigger social currents.
Absolutely. And once this idea of the sociological imagination took hold, it really changed the game for sociology. It became the main way sociologists tried to understand the world, connecting those individual stories to the larger societal picture.
Okay, so armed with this way of thinking, respecting social status, using the sociological imagination, what did the early pioneers actually find when they looked at society? What were these social laws they were searching for?
Well, as we said, Comte got the ball rolling, heavily influenced by science. And that influence meant that for a long time, maybe a century, the main goal was finding these objective patterns, these laws that govern society, almost like laws of nature, independent of what individuals wanted.
Even though Comte himself wanted to build a good society.
Yeah, that initial reformist impulse kind of got sidelined by the sheer power and prestige of the scientific method at the time. Finding the laws became the priority.
And when they looked for these laws, did they agree on where society was heading?
Not really. Broadly speaking, two main potential paths emerged from their analyses, two different visions for society's future.
Okay, what were they?
One view, strongly associated with the French sociologist Émile Durkheim, was ultimately, well, optimistic. He believed society, despite its problems, was evolving towards greater harmony and cohesion.
And the other?
That came from the German sociologist Max Weber. His view was much darker, much more pessimistic. He saw society heading towards decline, towards a kind of spiritual or moral degeneration.
Wow, completely different outlooks. Let's unpack Durkheim first. How did he see society evolving towards harmony?
Durkheim was writing as the Industrial Revolution was really transforming everything. He saw its massive impact. His starting point was comparing society before and after this huge shift.
What was the before picture like for him?
He described pre-industrial societies as typically having limited transport, limited communication. People lived and worked in smaller, more familiar circles. They shared similar experiences, similar skills, similar beliefs. Problems often had to be tackled together. This created a strong sense of social solidarity, a collective conscience, based on everyone being quite similar.
But the Industrial Revolution blew that apart.
Fundamentally, new technology drove a massive increase in the division of labor. People started specializing in very different jobs, needing totally different knowledge, having very different daily experiences. A factory worker's life was worlds apart from a farmer's or a merchant's. This specialization reduced the shared ground between people.
And there were other changes, too.
Yeah, he also noted the rise of new technologies, offering individual entertainment, things that people could consume alone, immersing themselves in private pleasures rather than collective activities.
So the paradox was that technology and progress were actually making people more separate.
Exactly. More specialized, more focused on their individual tasks or entertainment, less connected by shared experience. That's quite prophetic when you think about our world today, right? So many ways to connect online, yet people report feeling more isolated. Durkheim saw the beginnings of that trend over a century ago.
And he saw danger in this isolation.
He did. He worried people would become too self-absorbed, focused only on their own concerns, losing sight of the collective, the common good. And that, he thought, would inevitably lead to more social friction, more conflict.
Okay, so that's the problem. Where did his optimism come from then? How does society get back to harmony?
His optimism wasn't about going backwards. He argued that the new basis for social harmony had to come from recognizing our mutual dependence. Precisely because we're all so specialized, we actually need each other more than ever. I need the farmer for food, the doctor for health, the engineer for technology. We rely on this complex web of interdependence.
So solidarity shifts from being based on similarity to being based on difference and dependence.
Exactly. And Durkheim believed that eventually people would realize this. The negative consequences of pure individualism and conflict would become so apparent that society would consciously start to value and strengthen these bonds of mutual dependence. People would actively work to improve their relationships, build stronger communities, and that conscious effort would lead towards a more harmonious, good society.
So it's a hope based on future realization and conscious effort.
Yes. We don't know how long his eventually is, but it's a belief in the possibility of positive social change, driven by recognizing our interconnectedness. And you see echoes of it today, right? Companies doing team building to break down silos, people joining community groups, trying to build connections beyond just work or family. It's an ongoing effort.
So Durkheim, division of labor risks chaos through isolation, but the solution lies in embracing our mutual dependence.
That's the core of his argument. Now, Max Weber, he looked at the same changing world, but pinpointed a different root cause for the chaos he saw coming.
Not isolation, but something else.
For Weber, the core problem wasn't just the division of labor itself, but people increasingly chasing money and material wealth while abandoning, well, faith or a sense of higher purpose.
Okay, how did he arrive at that?
He started by observing the huge leap in work efficiency during industrialization. He thought, people aren't working this hard just because they're forced to. There wouldn't be this much innovation and productivity if it was just coercion. So, he concluded the motivation had to be internal for many people.
And what was that internal drive?
Faith. But again, for Weber, faith wasn't just about conventional religion. It could be any deeply held sense of mission, a calling, a noble purpose that gave meaning to your work and your life.
Like the soldier in Hacksaw Ridge you mentioned earlier, driven by belief, not money.
Exactly that kind of thing. When you connect your work to a mission you believe in, Weber argued, the hard work itself can bring a kind of happiness or fulfillment. Wealth and resources might come as a result, but they're secondary byproducts of achieving your purpose. Hard work leads to purpose fulfillment, which leads to happiness.
But he saw that changing.
Dramatically, he observed that the tangible, immediate rewards of wealth and material possessions started to overshadow the less tangible satisfaction of fulfilling one's faith or mission. The focus shifted. Hard work stopped being primarily about achieving purpose and became almost solely about acquiring wealth.
So the equation changed. Hard work equals acquiring wealth,
Yeah.
not necessarily happiness.
Right. And once wealth became the primary goal, it created a relentless cycle. People poured all their energy into getting more. Acquiring wealth just fueled the desire for even more wealth. Weber feared this would turn people into, well, he used the metaphor of an iron cage, trapped in the rational pursuit of profit and material gain, losing touch with deeper values. They become slaves to money.
And his conclusion was pretty bleak based on that.
Very bleak. He didn't see a path to a good society emerging from this. He saw degeneration, people losing themselves in materialism.
It's a powerful warning. Even if it's pessimistic, it really makes you think about why we work.
It absolutely does. And it adds a really interesting layer to the whole does money buy happiness debate. Weber would say that question misses the point.
Oh, so?
He'd argue, money and happiness aren't directly cause and effect. They are potentially both results of something deeper. Having that faith, that sense of mission or purpose, it's the purpose that drives the fulfilling hard work, and that work can lead both to happiness, fulfillment, and potentially to wealth as a byproduct.
That really changes how you think about the value of work itself.
It does. It suggests that the meaning isn't just in the job title or the paycheck. It's about the dedication, the purpose you bring to it. Striving to do even a seemingly boring job perfectly can have value if it's connected to your sense of purpose or commitment.
The product manager example illustrates this well.
Yet early on, that role wasn't always respected, seen as jacks of all trades, maybe interfering. But then people like Steve Jobs showed the immense value a product manager with vision and purpose could bring, integrating everything, driving innovation. The role didn't change overnight, but the purpose and impact brought to it transformed its perceived value. It became a critical, highly respected position.
So Durkheim and Weber, using scientific approaches, looking for social laws, ended up with totally different forecasts. One hopeful via interdependence, the other grim via materialism.
But they shared one attitude, didn't they? A sense that these big societal trends were like forces of nature and individuals were pretty much just swept along.
Yeah, like destiny. People could only watch society follow its path.
But, as the book points out, sociological thinking didn't stop there. Especially in more modern times, there's been a big shift, a growing recognition that, wait a minute, society isn't just some external thing happening to us. Society is made by people.
We create it through our actions.
Exactly. Our interactions, our choices, our beliefs, they build and maintain the social structures. And yes, those structures then turn around and constrain us, but it's a two-way street. It's dynamic. Social laws aren't fixed forever. They're constantly being shaped by us. So we need a better way to understand that back and forth.
Okay, so how does this newer understanding explain the connection between us and society? How does the self even develop in relation to all this?
George Herbert Mead, an American sociologist, gave us some really key ideas here. He looked right back at early childhood.
Before society really sinks its teeth in.
Kind of. For a time after birth, the infant acts pretty spontaneously, driven by impulses and needs. Society hasn't shaped them much yet. Mead called this the I, the unsocialized impulsive self.
But that changes quickly.
Very quickly. As the child interacts with others, they start noticing reactions. Smiles, frowns, praise, punishment. They begin to see how their actions affect others and how others respond. They adjust their behavior based on these attitudes.
Like the school example again, learning that studying gets approval.
Exactly. The child sees parents and teachers prefer students who study hard. So maybe they give up some playtime to hit the books, trying to become the kind of kid who gets positive feedback.
And their sense of self changes.
Yes, they start to see themselves not just as a free spirit, but as a good student. This self, formed by internalizing the attitudes of others, is what Mead called the me, the socialized self. It's the part of us that reflects society's expectations.
And this process gets even deeper. Another sociologist, Cooley, took it further.
Charles Horton Cooley did, yeah.
Yeah.
He said we don't just react to actual responses. We start to imagine how others might judge us, even for things we haven't done yet.
Anticipating the audience's reaction, almost.
Precisely. Back to the child example. Maybe they think, okay, I study well, but what if I also took up painting? Would my parents and teachers be even more impressed? Would they see me as talented? If the imagined reaction is positive, they might start painting.
And it shapes the self even more profoundly.
It does. Now, the self isn't just a good student, it's a talented student who also paints. Cooley called this the looking glass self. We see ourselves reflected in the mirror of society, or rather, in our imagination of how society sees us. That imagined reflection constantly guides our behavior and self-perception.
So if everyone is constantly adjusting based on this imagined reflection in the social mirror,
Then society starts to feel like this big external thing, almost with a life of its own beyond any one person's control. And once it feels external, it starts to constrain us.
how does that constraint actually work in daily life? Irving Goffman had an idea about this.
Yeah, Goffman's dramaturgical theory is a really powerful way to think about it. He basically said social life is like theater.
We're all actors on a stage.
Essentially, yes. Society is the grand stage. We prepare backstage, getting dressed, practicing what we'll say, and then perform front stage in our interactions. We follow scripts, the cultural norms, the rules, the expectations for how to behave in different roles and situations.
And other people are the audience.
Right. They're watching, evaluating our performance. Are we playing our part convincingly? We spend our lives trying to put on a good performance, collaborating with other actors to maintain the social reality.
Okay, society is a stage where actors using scripts. But what if there isn't just one script everyone has to follow? What if there are multiple options?
Now you're hitting the crucial point for understanding our current era, according to the book. If we're exposed to lots of different scripts, different cultures, different ways of living, different sets of expectations, then we have more freedom. We can pick and choose elements, improvise more, create a more unique performance. The stage's control, society's constraint becomes weaker.
And these scripts in real life are.
The author says they are primarily culture and institutions. When you live in a society where basically everyone shares the same core culture and lives under the same dominant institutions, the script feels very rigid. Society's influence is almost total. That's why those early sociologists might have seen things as more deterministic.
But that's not our world anymore, is it?
Not nearly as much. The argument is that globalization and the internet have massively increased our exposure to different cultures and institutions. Different scripts are available everywhere.
How do globalization and the internet weaken the old scripts?
They just connect everyone instantly. We can see how people live on the other side of the world, share ideas, borrow customs, join online communities based on interests rather than just location. We're not stuck with only the local script anymore. We can actively explore and even adopt ways of life that resonate with us, even if they challenge our original culture.
And the book highlights two big ways this weakening influence is playing out.
Yes. The first is a growing skepticism about absolute objective truth. There's just so much information swirling around from so many different perspectives.
It's hard to say definitively this is the truth.
Exactly. People realize that everyone interprets events and information based on their own background, their own values, the specific slice of information they have access to. No one has the complete picture. So the focus shifts. It becomes less about arguing who's definitively right or wrong, and more about understanding why different people see things differently and what we can learn from those diverse viewpoints.
Like the Zongzi example, don't just pick side, understand the argument.
Precisely. The historical debate about the origins of eating zongzi has different valid points. Instead of just declaring one side the winner, the sociological approach is to examine the evidence and reasoning behind each perspective.
Yeah.
You learn more about history, culture, and interpretation that way than by just finding the right answer.
Okay, questioning absolute truth. What's a second big effect?
People actively rejecting predefined social labels and working to reshape their own identities. We're less willing to just accept the boxes society might have put us in, based on our job, family background, or whatever. We want to define ourselves.
Is this where niche interests come in?
Very much so. Think about how many people pour time and energy into becoming experts in something specific, maybe even obscure. Learning peaking opera, making elaborate short films, mastering an extreme sport. It's partly about passion, sure, but it's also a way of saying, I'm not just generic person X. I'm this unique individual with these specific skills and interests. It differentiates them.
And even how we buy things is part of this.
The author argues it is. Consumption isn't just about needs anymore. It's a tool for identity construction.
Like buying stacks of books or online courses you might not even finish.
That's an example used. It might seem irrational, but sociologically, you could see it as trying to build or project an identity. I'm a lifelong learner. I'm intellectually curious. When traditional identity markers feel less stable or satisfying, people use consumption to try and signal who they want to be, find a new social anchor point.
So summing up this part, society's grip is loosening thanks to global connections. We question absolutes, and we actively try to forge our own identities. More freedom, basically.
Yes, increasing freedom of choice. And this leads to the idea that we're in an era where society isn't fixed, but something we're all constantly, collectively reshaping.
And here's that really fascinating implication, that what we do, what we think right now, could actually become part of the new rules, the new norms of the society taking shape.
Very empowering thought, isn't it? We're not just subject to social forces. We're part of the engine creating them.
So the advice then is to embrace that freedom. Don't be too constrained by worrying what others think. Follow what you believe is right. In doing so, contribute to building whatever comes next.
That's the takeaway. Cherish the freedom, challenge old constraints, pursue your path, and recognize that you're part of a collective process of reshaping society just by living your life authentically.
Okay, let's take this sociological toolkit now and apply it to a couple of really core human experiences. Marriage and religion, or faith. How does looking at them sociologically change our understanding?
Let's start with marriage. The dominant belief in many societies today is that marriage is or should be based on love. Freedom to choose your partner based on affection seems like a fundamental right, the natural basis for family.
Yeah, it feels like that's just how it is, how it's always been, love and marriage.
But the sociological view throws a curveball there. The book argues that while the ideal of love-based marriage is strong now, the widespread reality of people actually being able to choose partners freely, based primarily on love, is surprisingly recent, maybe only common in the last few decades.
Really? That reason. So what was marriage about before?
Historically, and in many places still, the family wasn't first and foremost about romance. It was a vital economic unit, a way to pool resources, manage land, ensure survival. Marriages were often strategic alliances between families, arranged for practical benefits, property consolidation, labor, social connections. Think about old phrases implying respect and duty rather than passionate love between spouses. They were partners in a tough world.
So function over feeling, initially.
Largely, yes. Love might happen, but it wasn't the prerequisite. Then the Industrial Revolution shook things up again. People moved to cities, work often became separate from the home, wages rose, and sometimes one income could support the family.
Leading to that man works outside, woman manages the home model.
Right, the separate spheres model.
Yeah.
And as the family's role as a pure economic production unit lessened, the possibility opened up for it to become more of an emotional refuge, a haven of love.
So the ideal of love became more central then.
The ideal did, yes. But the book points out it was still conditional. Women often lacked economic independence and autonomy. The model was often based on the man providing financially and the woman managing the domestic sphere, with love as the expected emotional bond within that structure.
That "I'll support you" line capturing the economic reality underpinning the romance.
Exactly. It reflected that social expectation. The man provides, the woman nurtures, and that's the natural family based on love.
But things have changed dramatically again more recently.
Hugely. Women's movements, greater access to education and jobs, women becoming major players in the economy, it's changed the landscape. Now, broadly speaking, both men and women are expected to be producers, and women have gained much more autonomy over their lives and choices.
And that's what finally made truly love-based autonomous marriage widely possible.
That's the argument. When both partners have more independence and choice, the need for marriage as primarily an economic or status arrangement decreases. People have more freedom to choose based on personal connection, love, and compatibility.
So phenomena like marrying without lots of assets, naked marriage, or marrying very quickly, flash marriage, or even those marriages of convenience that sometimes happen, they all reflect, in different ways, this newer freedom compared to the older, more constrained models.
Precisely. They show the increased flexibility and the shift away from purely traditional, economically driven structures towards choices based more on individual desire and circumstance, even if some choices seem unconventional. The traditional love marriage is actually quite modern.
A fascinating historical perspective. Now, what about faith or religion? The common story is that science and reason are making religion fade away. Fewer believers, less influence, maybe it'll disappear eventually.
That narrative is definitely out there, and you can point to declining attendance in some traditional institutions. But the sociological perspective in the book offers a counter-argument. Religion isn't shrinking overall. It's likely growing and changing form. It's probably going to be with us forever, just looking different.
Growing, how can that be if traditional religion seems less dominant?
It hinges on a broader sociological definition of religion. It's not just about God or established churches. The author uses a definition with three key elements.
What are they?
1, a group of people, followers, or members. 2, required doctrines, meaning shared beliefs, rules, teachings, or practices they adhere to. 3, an object of worship or reverence, something the group holds sacred or deeply values.
Okay, so Christianity fits easily. Church, community, group, Bible teachings, doctrines, cross-God, object of worship.
Right, but now apply that definition elsewhere. The book uses the example of football fandom.
Football as a religion, seriously.
Let's check the boxes sociologically. Is there a group? Undeniably. Clubs, massive global fan bases, supporter groups?
Okay, check. Required doctrines.
Think about it. Fans learn the history, the stats, the chants. They have fiercely held beliefs. Our rivals are evil. This player is a legend. They develop rituals, lucky shirts, match day routines. Breaking these rules might even be blamed for a loss. These function very much like doctrines or a shared dogma for the group.
I can see that. And the object of worship.
Stadiums are often called cathedrals or holy ground. Fans make pilgrimages. Club crests, legendary players, iconic trophies. These are revered, treated as sacred symbols of the group's identity and passion.
So, sociologically speaking, intense football fandom ticks all three boxes. Group, doctrines, object of worship.
That's the insight. It's not saying it's the same as traditional religion in content, but the social structure and the dynamics are remarkably similar. It fulfills that same human need for belonging, shared belief, ritual, and reverence.
And if football fits, then maybe lots of other things do too.
That's the implication. Think about intense online gaming communities, hardcore fitness movements, dedicated hobbyist groups, maybe even some political followings or brand loyalties. Many develop group identities, shared beliefs and practices, and things they hold sacred.
So religion isn't dying, its form is just diversifying like crazy.
Exactly. The underlying social functions that religion serves, providing community, meaning, identity, shared values, are still very much in demand. And in our modern connected world, it's incredibly easy to find like-minded people. Form a group around anything that gives you belonging and pride, develop your own doctrines, and find things to revere together.
So the future is more religion, just not necessarily the old-fashioned kind.
That's the prediction. We'll likely see countless groups, big and small, emerging around all sorts of shared interests and identities, exhibiting these religious characteristics in a sociological sense. Far from disappearing, these new forms of religion will likely multiply and be a constant feature of society.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground from Witt's invitation to sociology.
It definitely packs a lot of perspective shifts into one book.
We started with the basics, society as interacting individuals, the absolute necessity of considering social status, both hierarchy and role, and the power of the sociological imagination to link personal lives to larger forces.
Then we tracked the early search for social laws, contrasting Durkheim's hope for harmony through interdependence with Weber's warning about materialism eroding faith, and crucially, how modern thought emphasizes our own role in shaping those very laws.
We explored how our self develops socially, the I, the me, the looking-glass self, and how Goffman's idea of life as theater, with culture and institutions as scripts, explains social constraint.
And we saw how today's world, with its flood of different scripts via globalization and the net, weakens that constraint, leading us to question absolutes and actively reshape our identities. More freedom, more flux.
And finally, applying this lens showed us love-based marriage is a modern phenomenon, not timeless, and that religion isn't vanishing, but morphing into countless new forms, like fervent fan groups, meeting basic social needs.
It really underscores how sociology can piece back the layers of the familiar and shows the hidden social machinery underneath, a powerful way to understand the world more deeply.
So, thinking about this era, the book describes where society's influence is maybe less rigid, where we have more freedom, and where we're all collectively reshaping the rules as we go. What's the final thought for someone listening?
Here's something to chew on. Which suggests our actions and thoughts right now can become part of the future's social norms. So think about your own life. What's one way, maybe a belief you hold, a passion you pursue, a way you interact that feels like you pushing against an old script, doing something differently than maybe expected? And then consider, how might that very personal act, multiplied by millions of others doing something similar in their own lives, be contributing, perhaps invisibly, to a larger shift in society itself?
Where is your life part of rewriting the play? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.